Well, greetings everyone, and welcome once again to our Monday night session of To an Imperfect Union, uh, brought to you by the political consciousness of West Coast Steeler fan. Um, if you'd like to donate or contribute to the show, you can see our Cash App right there, J King 3. You can contact me on Facebook and all social media, West Coast Steelers fan or JEK3. Okay, commercials out of the way. Um, I am continuing uh, our discussion from last week about hate and mental illness or conscious decision. But I also want to touch on a few other subjects that have been mentioned in the news, uh, like inflation, for instance. Uh, Spoken about almost in terms of that it only affects other people. It does not affect minorities or other races. Um, and also, as I said, I wanted to continue discussion about hate, mental health. Bill, I see you there. How are you doing?
Hello there.
I got a little feedback there.
Oh, really? Let me see what I can do about that. Let me see. See.
Okay, that seems to have gotten rid of it. Uh, but looking very scholarly tonight. Did we catch you just coming in from work or what?
No, I had something else I had to do right before this for another show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know it's got to be. It's a very busy time for you between social media and drafting and all that. I know it's pretty time. It's a pretty busy time for you. We're glad that you take time. Give us a little time on Monday evenings.
Yeah, I do what I can. So recently we've had a bunch of job interviews. So we filled one position. We still have two more positions to fill. So any recent college graduates out there who are interested perhaps in working in sexual risk avoidance education, or if you have an interest in working as a trio counselor at an education opportunity center, hit up James. It'll send me your resume.
Okay, and this is in the Chicago area, or is
Yes, yes, this would be in the Chicago area. Unless you want to get on the private jet and fly, then you can live any place. But if you would need a non-trans, continental or non-speed, was it supersonic speed transport? If you don't have access to that, then yes, you want to be local. Uh-oh. I lost James. It's weird. I can't hear James anymore. What happened there? That's not good. Let's see. Huh. Yeah, I couldn't hear any of that. Hold on. Let's see, I can no longer hear James. That's not great. Let me see what just happened. Uh, okay, let's see what's going on. I don't know why suddenly I can't hear James. Uh, huh. That's very strange. Now I'm suddenly not hearing James. Let's see. What just happened there with my audio? Huh. Let me see if I can figure out why I can't hear James all of a sudden. Okay, we'll try a little test action. Why can't I hear James? Okay, so I still can't hear him. I don't know what's going on. Huh. Hmm. I am not hearing James at all. James, can you hear me? So you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Hmm. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Huh. Okay, I'm gonna try something else. Okay, so I'm still not hearing James. Trying to figure out what's going on. So unplugged the headphones, plugged headphones in, plugged in different headphones, unplugged those headphones. I can hear other things. Let me see something. Okay, it's not that. I cannot figure out why I can't hear. Let's see. Uh, okay, let's see. What have I not tried? I could try a different laptop, maybe, but I don't think that. Let me try this. Okay, let's see something. Uh,
Okay, so let's try this again. So now you can't hear me? Oh, okay. So, what is going on? Okay, so we tried two different laptops. I've tried with and without headphones. Um, Volume for me is all the way up. Let's see. Huh. What else have I not thought of? See something. Settings. Audio.
Testing the speakers on StreamYard. Sounds like they're working.
Let me see something. Huh. So my speakers are working because I can hear other sounds. I cannot figure out. Are we sure your headset's working, James? Okay. Okay. I don't know what that was you said, but it sounds like you're saying they are working. So, but I don't know what it is. Hold on. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're saying. Hold on. Lost connection. Oh, lost connection. Share the right camera. Let me see something. Okay.
I can't hear you.
Can
There
you
you
hear me
go.
now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Bill, can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
That's
You had me changing things, checking things. It was you.
The whole time.
Dr. Casey always fronts me out. See, I feel
Oh,
like I feel like Stephen A. Smith now. That's right. And then, good evening, Dr. Casey. How have you been?
I've been all right. How y'all been?
Uh,
Whew.
well, uh, we have been doing pretty well. We had a great conversation last week, and I wanted to start it again this week. Uh, and mainly because I wanted to get your concepts and your thoughts on this, seeing as how your coaching background.
Hmm.
Uh, so I started off with a little thing. It says hate, mental illness, or conscious decision. What's your thoughts on that?
So with this particular topic, I think that it is both mental illness and conscious decision. And I say that because a lot of people are programmed to hate. They're taught that from a very young age. And when you're taught something like that for so long, it becomes a mental illness. It's almost like being traumatized by um, any other event. Like if you grow up in a black home and your parents verbally abuse you, that's traumatizing. If you grow up in a white home and they're telling you kill these people, hate these people, and all these other mean, derogatory threats. Basically, you're teaching your children that that is a traumatic experience because they're not only being taught that, but they're watching it. They are literally witnessing and being taken and shown and told to celebrate when somebody is killed in this manner. So it is a conscious decision of mental illness, because it's a conscious decision to be for the parents to raise their children like that, and to continue on once you get a certain age to believe those things is a continued conscious decision, because there is other information out there to teach you that all people aren't this way, but everybody doesn't have access to it. It's almost like when I lived in Phoenix in 2008 to 2010, um, it was not a lot of black people there. But I had never in my life been somewhere that a lot of black people didn't exist. So that meant that anytime I would go out, it would be like, oh my God, look, oh my God, oh my God. Anytime I, as a black person, would see another black person, it'd be like, hey man, what you, it's because you've never experienced it. So if you've never been in a situation like that, it's like when people don't leave their neighborhood. I mean, they might not go to another city outside of their city. If you don't ever experience something outside of your confinement, then you will never know that something more exists. So these are people that are focused on hate. That's all they, the same way people get tunnel vision on social media about different stuff, or OCD, they are OCD about whatever it is that they stand for, and that is a conscious decision at a certain age again. But it is definitely a mental illness, because it's not something that you can just be like, okay, well, I don't feel that way no more. That has to be rooted out of you, like self hate has to be rooted out of people. If somebody's told they're ugly every day, eventually it don't matter how beautiful they are, they're gonna be looking at that. This is why a lot of people get cosmetic surgery, because somebody has convinced them that something is wrong with them and they are perfectly fine. Like most of these girls be very pretty, very stacked already, they be already everything that they need to be, but somebody has convinced them that they are not enough. And because of that, they go and do things to try to make themselves enough. That also is a conscious decision of mental illness, because you're consciously accepting what somebody else is telling you. And it is hard to change a person that has engraved that into their mind.
All right, now wait a minute. Now maybe I'm getting two things mixed up here, because in the criminal definition of mental illness, you are not capable of making decisions. So
Well,
therefore, go ahead, Bill.
well, that's not quite accurate. Mentally ill people get put in prison all the time. Insane people are not supposed to be put in prison. You can be mentally ill and still be judged competent for trial, James, and it happens all the time. So the legal, there is no legal definition of mental illness. There's a legal definition of being incompetent to stand trial, and it's called incompos mentis, right? It means that you so the things we're talking about are mens rea and being incompos mentis. So incompos mentis means you're mentally competent to understand the charges against you and what the punishment means. Mens rea means consciousness of guilt. Those are the things that the law tries to actually be able to quantify. They don't try to quantify mental illness, because loads of the prisons are full of mentally ill people. In fact, I would bet you that 80% of the people in prison have some sort of mental illness. So no, they don't try to. If they said everybody mentally ill was to be set free, the prisons would empty out, James. So no, they don't try to define mental illness, and there is no legal definition of mental illness. Now, there are the American Psychological Association defines mental illness, but not the legal profession.
So it sounds like almost like the discussion that we had last week about the responsibility of the police. But I'll get back to that in a minute, because there was a time.
Let me
Uh,
ask you a question real quick.
go
What
ahead.
is your definition of mental illness? Because it's it seems like we may have a difference of what we're discussing.
Well, that's what I'm trying to define, that line there. What is mental consciousness as opposed to mental illness? As Bill said, the first thing that when you go to prison, the first thing they do is try to look for some type of cocktail to give you, so that they can keep you in line. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you're mentally ill. It's just that they want you in a certain state in order for them to be able to control you. So when I say, is it a conscious decision? I'm saying, as you said, okay, I grew up in a family, they would told me, all this time that, I'm supposed to hate these people, so forth and so on. But when I get to prison, my race shuns me. So I get kind of taken in as an orphan. Now, because this particular group came to my rescue, does that truly mean that, you know, I have lost the hate, or does that mean that I'm trying to protect my ass?
You gonna conform to whatever self-preservation sets, because if you it's you see it all the time. This is why people become yes men and kind of go along to get along. That whole narrative comes from I don't have nobody. It's why people join gangs. There's nobody left to protect me, so I'm going to where the protection is, and I'm gonna do whatever they say, whatever I gotta do to stay down with whatever they doing so that I am protected. It's not necessarily that they love the people. This is why people turn on their crew members once they get to a certain status and they get a certain amount of money themselves. When they establish their own right, now they feel like, what I'm saying, well, I ain't never like this such and such anyways, because what I'm saying, and I was just around. This is why people get killed by people they know.
Most people who get killed by people they know. Quite frankly,
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
you.
people that posed as confidants and comrades, and they were not.
wives, husbands, girlfriends, the whole parents, children. Yes,
All of the above, because you can be born to a person and still not feel that connection.
See, I'll give you the foundation why I asked this question, Dr. Casey, was because of the particular gun bill, and everybody is associating this gun bill with mental health. And
I mean, most of these people is not going to the mental health doctor to get diagnosed with mental health
right,
problems
right.
anyway.
But when you look at, what do all of these people or these shooters have in common?
Other
Is
than
they
their skin
all
color and their background.
well, but they all write a manifesto. Like,
Mhm.
I hated this. And I mean, okay, so it's kind of like what I was saying with what was the kid that just got off for going. His mother took him across the state line, and he shot
oh,
up
you
some
know, Kyle
Rittenhouse,
Rittenhouse.
written. Okay, yeah,
Rittenhouse, something house.
right, right. So that's what I'm kind of asking is that now, according to him, there's no hate involved, and he actually won his case. So is has he been rehabilitated? I mean, what
No,
Oh,
what
no,
what rehabilitation has he
well,
gone through?
well,
quite the opposite. He's
so
gone
It,
on a
it's almost like it's almost like
so was
for
he
me.
mentally ill during that particular
no, he's just a
time?
white guy in America. I mean, is every white man in America mentally ill?
Yeah, they all get the hate in them. I mean, and then they try to
that
blame
that
it on black people. They try to make black people seem like we are the people that do all the things that they just naturally do. We're the most peaceful, for the most part, people in the world, but they terrorize people. So yeah, they're all mentally ill.
no, seriously though, Bill. I mean, i- what is your distinction between the mental illness and the conscious decision?
But there doesn't have to be a distinction. This is what we have to drill down to how we're defining certain things. Loads of mentally ill people make decisions and are able to hold down jobs, able to get married, be successful. I mean, Elon Musk has a mental illness. He's the richest man in the world. So you need to give me what you need, right? Because there's loads of mentally ill people do all the things that other people do. So there's somebody who's able
Okay, here's what I'm trying to figure out. Why, in order for us to get a gun bill or a bill for us to legislate how guns are sold or who they're sold to, it has to be linked to mental illness.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but once again, we've painted ourselves into this particular corner because otherwise we have to face the true nature of this country, and nobody wants to do that.
Right.
So this is once again we talked about this. The country is literally drenched in blood. Literally, the land, the ground you stand on, the ground I live on, the ground you live on is drenched in blood. Generations of people have been murdered in this country for everything from the country itself, right, to seize the land, to generations and generations of chattel slavery. I mean, it would take us forever to go through the various genocides of various peoples that have taken place in America. I mean, if you wanted to break it down to individual nations and things like that. So I won't do all that. But here's what I will tell you. America has romanticized the lone white guy with a gun since, I don't know, George Washington. I mean, it's been like, this isn't something new. And, when I heard that President Trump, Donald John Trump, said that his favorite president, other American president, was of all people Andrew Jackson, who, in addition to his genocide, right, against the Creek and Seminole and others, fought, was it 6 different duels, put 4 or 5 people in the ground with his own hands. I mean, a violent sociopath, right? Who would kill people over like not liking his wife's figgy pudding. I mean, I'm not even joking. Like literally, when the wife of somebody in his cabinet said that something about his wife's cooking, he challenged that guy to a duel and killed him. Do you know that? He challenged that guy to a duel and killed him over his wife's cooking. Violent sociopath. Okay? So you could be a violent sociopath and be president of the United States, in case you're wondering, James. So when you say mental illness, loads of mentally ill people have done lots of things in this country. America would not exist, right, without the activities of mental ill people. Well, so when you say mental illness and how we tie certain things to, we have neglected mental health in this country for, well, once again, ever, like from the jump. And then as bad as things were, things got worse, right? As I've talked about before, almost 40% of the free community resources that were available in the nation dwindled and disappeared in the 8 years of the Reagan administration and didn't get better when Clinton came in. Clinton did nothing to restore what Reagan had gutted. So we lost all those quote unquote free clinics, or many of them. So it used to be that every, 16 or so blocks in major cities, you'd have a free clinic. And they might not have a mental health professional there all the time, but at least a couple times a week, there'd be a mental health professional. They probably weren't, they probably didn't graduate tops of their class. I'm not trying to make it sound like it was the greatest mental health in the world, but there was free mental health available at one point.
And most of those came with, usually they were located in some type of drug counseling centers or methadone centers or
not all the time, but often.
No, but I mean, usually because they were located in certain neighborhoods. And
yes, they were very much in certain neighborhoods.
So, yeah.
Oh yes. When I say free clinic, the free clinic is not in Calabasas. I mean, no, James. I'm not confused about that.
But and once again, I have to come around to and we've all been in the military. Bill, as a member of a special unit, you are taught, or the psychology of accepting violence and being rewarded for how, but you're rewarded for how good you are.
Well, if you don't get to be in my unit, if you're not really good at violence, they'll send you someplace else unless you not only are good at violence, but are good at encouraging it in others, training it. And we would get up at 4:55 in the morning and scream, kill, kill, kill at the top of our lungs for several minutes every morning for months, man. So, yes.
And the cadence. I mean, come on, come on.
Oh, every cadence call had sex, violence, sexual violence, violent sex. I mean, how many different
Right.
combinations of that you want to put together? I mean, the most horrible things I've heard in my life, I've heard during cadence calls. The most disturbing, violent, horrific things. I mean, things, physical impossibilities, even. But I mean, woo. I mean, I don't know if they still do it now because it's a different world. But oh my God, the things I heard. When did you get out, Dr. Casey?
In 2004.
Okay, so that was maybe slightly more civilized. Did you hear like horrific, violent, sexual violent things in cadence calls?
No, but we did have drill sergeants having sex with soldiers, so they
Oh,
exchanged one for the other.
Yeah, okay.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not really.
Tomato,
horrific
tomato.
either.
yeah. Uh,
It was a little different. We didn't have anything. To me, my military experience, I'm sure, was nothing like y'all's because I felt like I could see the softy in everybody. So they would yell and stuff, but they would be so nice all the other times that when they was yelling and it didn't fit. Like it was like it didn't make sense. So and we didn't do no cadence calling when we was after training.
Oh,
Everything else was
yeah. No,
got
no 20-mile hikes for you.
I mean, well, I had profiles all the time. I had my kneecap started dislocating when I was in AIT. So now I avoided all that. They thought I was a sham artist until I went to Iraq when everybody else was trying to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, but as I'm thinking, and as we spoke of, some programs, back when I was in prison, they actually paid employers when you came out,
Yep.
to hire you. They
Yep.
gave you they gave them tax breaks, and
Right.
and they even subsidized part of your pay.
Yep.
And then the '90s came, and all of a sudden, because of recidivism, so they said, all of these programs were taken away, and it was lock you up and throw away the key.
Yep.
So
Dumb.
here's a guy that hates black people, but you're doing life. Now you're it's changed now because I would assume that there's no such thing as integrated cells anymore, uh, because of the race thing. But my point is, are you rehabilitated? Because, well, if there's no such thing as rehabilitation and there's recidivism, does that work with hate also?
So I've had some experience in working in programs that did prison outreach. And it's funny because California is a great case study, because at one point California had done the greatest job, maybe not world history, but certainly the greatest job in our country at one point in reducing recidivism. And it was when they were quote unquote soft on crime, right? When they were actually helping people to get their GEDs or associate degrees or bachelor's degrees, sometimes even graduate degrees while they were in prison. And it was working. I'm not going to say it was 100% because no program's 100%, but it was significant reduction. And the more educated people got, the less likely were to reoffend. Fun fact, right? The most successful programs ever in terms of reducing recidivism are educational programs, right? Beyond what any religious program has done, beyond what any hard work program has done, name any program you want to name. The ones that have been the most successful were educational programs. It's not even close. It's a blowout. They're so far above every other possible tried solution in reducing recidivism that it's not even close. It's like a stop the fight, TKO.
I've been
And
out
so
since
many.
1985.
So when these tough on crime people came
It-
in, when these tough on crime people came in and gutted these programs, recidivism went right. And what do? They blame the communities, they blame the criminals, they blame everything but their own dumb selves who gutted these programs and just have. Now, it should be pointed out also that for profit prisons are very much a thing.
right.
And some people have a definite incentive to make sure that there's fully stocked prisons available at all times. So, and in fact, to the point that they're overflowing because then you have to build more of them, and that means more cha-ching. So, I mean, there's so many things wrong, and really, they don't even hold out rehabilitation as even really a goal anymore. Frankly, James. Uh,
There's no parole. If there's no parole, what I mean, you know,
for what reason would I be working to be rehabilitated anyway? Right, correct. So, I mean, the system is not only broken because the system was always broken. It was just less broken at other points. It's that they want it to get worse, not better. That's the real issue. Like, there's not they've completely given up on improving things, and now
Mhm.
they just want to create. I mean, it's like something from the dystopian nightmare novels, right? Where you have these essentially Darwinian situations where if someone manages to actually get rehabilitated, one, they've done it all themselves. God bless them. And two, as you said, for what purpose, right? they're likely to spend the rest of their natural lives in prison. So, or as much of their natural lives as they can practically keep them there. And I mean, I'm not quite all the way to the people that say abolish prisons, and I mean, I'm not quite there. I mean, restorative justice should be more of a thing, particularly for nonviolent offenders. I've never understood why we're putting, you know, so many dollars into locking up nonviolent offenders for long stretches. It's never made sense to me. Violent offenders, sure, I get it, but locking up millions of nonviolent offenders for years at a time is incredibly expensive. First of all, these same people who talk about tax cuts and how much they hate large government, you don't hate it that much. If we're locking up millions of nonviolent offenders, new ones, millions new ones each year, and keeping the old ones in for longer stretches, it's stupidly expensive. We're talking about billions and billions of wasted dollars. It's exhausting to talk about and worse to think about.
yeah. What do you think, Dr. Casey? Especially when you start talking about like I said, you start talking about rehabilitation and things like that. I see Mr. Scott is in. I'm gonna let him in as you talk.
I don't think. I mean, well, rehabilitation exists in prisons. When you think about, well, it's not really rehabilitation. They offer services in prison more than it is rehabilitation because they're not addressing the issues of the person that got them in the situation. They're just allowing them to take trades and do other things like that. Now, the reason why the prison system is the way it is because it's a cash cow. It is what people are using to profit and make millions and billions of dollars from, so they would never slow it down because the capitalists in them won't have for that. I think that rehabilitation should be taken at a different perspective and a different stance, and it should be more no different than what we need in the streets when you have social workers and psychologists and a lot of people who can actually engage and help people to understand themselves and understand life and what purpose means to them. When we start doing that, then we'll see some real progress, because right now you have a system that it takes you, put you in a system, put you back on the street, you on parole, just to put you back in the system for real. Because it's hard to avoid going back to jail on parole. You can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't hang out with people that you probably would be hanging out with because you're on parole. You can't have no weapons. So if you are facing any type of threats on the streets or anything like that, you can't have no type of protection. It puts you in a very dark place. And then most times You can't even find a job unless you take something that's almost demeaning in order to work. So it is a lot that goes with rehabilitation and the prison system and the need for reform. I am with Bill. I don't think it should be gone away with or done away with because you do need to be able to lock some people up. But I also believe that all these people that want to be killers, y'all need to take y'all ass to these wars and fight in some wars since y'all think y'all need to shoot up everybody. Um, but that's just my outlook on things.
Send them to jail where they don't have a gun, and then see how they survive. We have to, but I get off to that. Mr. Scott, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing real good. I'm doing real good. I'm glad to join you tonight. And I basically co signed everything Dr. Casey just said. I think it was last time I was on the show, I had dressed up for Dr. Casey, but she didn't show up. So she
That was last
had
week.
dressed
That
up.
was
I
just that
had,
was just one
oh
time last
man.
week. That was just one time.
So she stands people up. So I guess that's how that rolls.
you,
Well,
you, you,
on the
Actually,
but you
uh,
know that she can go back and look and see what you wore last week, right?
yeah, why you want to bust the players?
while he over here selling wolf
But,
tickets.
but in regards to what you were saying, about rehabilitation, because my first thing out of grad school was I was a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the state of Minnesota. And so the goal was to actually guide people to do something where they could take care of themselves. Whatever that was, what define what their interests were, what their aptitudes were, and to really work with clients to see how can you fit into something that you enjoy doing, keep you out of trouble, and you can make a living at. And so I don't see that approach much anymore. I mean, I don't see that they offer those kind of services where, I mean, we had like on the job training programs where
Yeah,
you could go and work at a place just to see if you liked it. If you don't like that, but then you get an idea of what this means. You got to get up at 7 o'clock to get there. You got to get there. You got to do this. You got to do that. And I don't know. I don't really see any real rehabilitation, even though I've heard of things now where people in prison can obtain college degrees.
Mm,
Exactly how
yeah.
that works, I don't know. I don't know if they have to pass a test or if
You
there's
do it. You do it by correspondence. But uh, today, I would imagine you would have some, different type of
they have internet and
classes,
everything
Zoom,
on
and
now.
all
Mhm.
that. But back
Sure,
in,
online is a way of life now. I mean,
but
online, that's the way the world works now.
but even back in the day, I mean, you would take correspondence courses. They'd send you a booklet. You do a lesson, and you send a lesson back in, and the professor grades it, and so forth and so on. But it was all done by correspondence. Uh, Today I would assume with technology, it's much different. But since you've dealt with rehabilitation, then you also know what, in the 90s when people were talking about recidivism. And that was the excuse to make up these laws where now they lock you up and throw away the key. So what I was asking everyone else is, you know, is there, when you talk about hate, is there also recidivism in your way of thinking? Can
Well, again, that's what Dr. Casey was saying. Once they get out of prison, the obstacles that they have to really get back into society, things you can't do. You've got this record. You can't get an apartment. You can't get a job. You can't. So, I mean, this is what the spiraling thing makes it just continue to happen. And and out of your question, I think that Dr. Casey really stated that you come out of prison and you have a record in this country. You have a tough road, and James. You could probably tell me more about that than I know. But in working as rehabilitation, I could see the barriers and don't have a GED, didn't graduate from high school, have all these things in your background. So you're illiterate, only went to such and such. All these labels and things that get on folks, it just contributes to all these difficulties.
So go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that we do at Trio, right, is we go into the prisons and help prisoners to complete the financial aid process. So as long as the offense you committed was not while you were receiving federal financial aid, you're still eligible to receive federal financial aid. And then we talk to them to a certain amount about, things that they want to do. Now, some prisons still have is at least they have some association with the local community college. But sadly, in some places, they've severed that relationship. But in places where they have not severed that relationship, then in that case, it's a distance learning setup, as was mentioned. And if the student is accepted, and since community colleges are open enrollment, as long as there's room for them, in essence, and in a virtual classroom, they room, is sort of a nebulous thing, but you're allowed to have up to a certain number of students, just sort of, I guess, as a procedural thing. But as long as there's room, even though they're not physically in the classroom, they can take whichever classes are available. And once again, until they run out of funding. So, but there a lot of the special programs that used to be there to help imprisoned people have been severed. So essentially, other than the fact that they're logging on from the prison library or whatever it is, they're simply being treated just like any other student. There's no special services in many cases for them. We're as special as it gets when we go in there and visit. We visit maybe twice a year at most. So they're not getting a lot of additional assistance. They don't have special tutoring programs as much as they used to. And all the other things that used to be in place 40 and 50 years ago, a lot of those things, like I said, got gutted by the tough on crime crowd, who actually have kicked the recidivism and crime rate up higher. If you want to cut recidivism, bring back those programs and bring them back bigger and stronger. But nobody has the guts to do it because nobody wants to look like they're soft on crime. It is the stupidest thing in the world. And, it just blows my mind that nobody will just point to the data. The same people who say facts like feelings, not feelings all the time, suddenly get all in their feelings. We're just talking about what the facts are of recidivism. You want to cut recidivism? Bigger programs, better programs, more programs that benefit people who are locked up, and you'll actually drive down recidivism.
What's your thoughts there, Mr. Scott? One of the things that I found that was a problem is unless you did a lot of extra things on your own, or like you said, it had to be something that you were into, some sort of self-interest. Um, you weren't really prepared for an entry-level job. You had to do some extra studying. You had to do, like maybe you didn't know how to interview. There were certain things that you just weren't able to do, even though you might have had the fundamentals. How did you find that, Mr. Scott?
Well, again, I thought things like an on-the-job training program was a good program. I thought for somebody to actually go into that environment and see what it's like and get a chance to go in there where there's no outcome,
Right.
there's nothing, no penalty if it doesn't work out or you don't like it or you don't show up, until you find something that you think you like, and then begin to explore where you could go in that type of area, and if that's something you want to pursue. So I think the on the job training things and our agencies like the urban leagues and NAACPs all around the country, they had job programs. They had things in the community when these things after the 1968 riots with Martin Luther King. I'm telling you, the script flipped,
Yep.
and that's why all people like me go to a graduate school for free. Somebody barely graduated from high school, but that's how this country goes. bad things happen, or they get in fast motion and give you a whole lot of rhetoric. Okay, it's been all through history.
Yep.
It's been all through the wars. It's been all through the Oklahoma thing. It's been all through St. Louis. It's been all these things happen, and they get in fast motion for a little while. And now George Floyd, they're going to do this. They're going to do that. They're going to do, but then it defaults back to the normal thing that they do. And this is where we got to get some people in there that can do something about that. I mean, this Congressional Black Congress, I mean, I don't know what the heck. They've been there so long. People like Clyburn and you know, I don't want to touch on anybody's state or anything. You know, I don't want our area. But what are you doing to make a difference? And this is it's all tied together.
Well, Dr. Casey, do you agree? I mean, because I kind of look at this and I'm saying to myself, like, all right, these programs have been shown to work, but once again, we kind of talk about numbers, and numbers can be true, but the person that's talking the numbers can manipulate those numbers to you. It's not the number 1 and 1 is still 2, but maybe under some circumstances it might be 3. What's your thoughts on that, Doctor?
Ain't nothing else I can say about that. Ain't really too much I can say, because definitely numbers can be manipulated and made to appear something different. You don't even have to say a wrong number. You don't have to say 1 + 1 = 3. You just have to present the 1 + 1 being 2 in a way that other people don't understand clear enough. So if you think about COVID, instead of saying the number of people that were surviving, healing, and recovering, which was in the hundreds of millions, they amplified, which was like 6% of people was dying from COVID. I'm not saying that those 6% of people were not important. I lost people I love too, but they didn't amplify that it was only 6%. They amplified the amount of people. So they said 700 and something thousand instead of saying 600, 6%, instead of saying 94% of people are surviving and recovering from COVID, even if they have side effects. But instead of saying that, they weighed in on the number that sounded really huge versus stating all the facts. So if you just present it in a way that people don't know any better, then you're gonna get the result that you want.
Bill, you ever seen a casualty report with survivors on it?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. The reason they report that we're now over 1.1 million is because it's an unacceptable number. That's why, like, a major industrialized nation shouldn't have that kind of mortality from a fairly. If we had done the right things early on in the process, we'd never have gotten to this point. That's why they report on it. That's why they hammer away at it. Because
But have you heard them ever say anything about the people that survive or
it's like reporting when someone doesn't get shot? Like that shouldn't be news.
if the grasp is people that caught COVID, then don't just tell me the people that caught COVID and died. Tell me the people that survived too. Because if you only tell me the amount of people that died, then you're reiterating fear, which also weakens my immune system, which also makes me more vulnerable to disease and all of those things. So
Dr.
if you tell me that it's a chance that I'm going to live versus that if you get it, you're going to die, then my mindset is going to be different.
Well, I mean, if you read, and once again, maybe you'll just read headlines, but if you read the whole story, it says out of X number of Americans that have been infected at this point, so many of them are alive, and so many. And this is the number that died. If you don't reach the headlines, now maybe people just don't read headlines. Maybe you don't read beyond the headline. But if you read the whole story, that is reported in the story. The issue is, for me, that a major industrialized nation, right, with the resources we should be able to put into public health, that number should be at most 80, 90,000, not 1.12 million. Like, why is that even, why that it should even be allowed to happen? That should be news that we failed that tremendously, especially the early part of the process. If in the very early days, right, in that first 60, 90 days, it had been universally hard lockdowns. If your job isn't literally life and death, stay your butt at home. And if we had
COVID was going around way before they started saying
I know.
like, 'cause I had a friend that had COVID.
I'm aware of
Hold
that.
on, hold on. Let's not get off the topic
Oh,
of
okay.
hate here, because right now, I mean, this is what I believe has more to do with the divide of our country than anything else. But what I don't quite understand is how you expect people to do something that I don't think is normal. And this is what I mean by that. As long as you can, and whether we want to admit it today or not, as long as you can have another race point to you and say, well, I'm one step above them,
Right.
then how all of a sudden do you get that person to accept you? Because now he thinks that anything or any improvement that you make is at his expense.
Well, James, that's the elephant in the room.
There's no
That's,
elephant in the room.
that's white supremacy. That's white supremacy all the way around. I mean, look at these people can't figure out baby food. They now all of a sudden you can't find it. Now all of a sudden the gas just doubles and triples. I mean, this shows the level of people that we have in control. That what are they doing?
Well, that's another thing. Another subject. I mean, when people start talking about, okay, well, gas is up to $5. Well, if you're out here in California, in some places it might be six, but like I said, it's at least 5.50 here in San Diego. So you're talking about, another 10 or 12% for the cost of milk. You're talking about another 18% for groceries. So, it seems like people don't realize that black folks buy gas, black folks buy groceries. This affects us just as much as them, if not more, if you're on the low end of the economic scale. Thoughts?
So I think everybody here, well, I shouldn't assume, probably most of us here remember this very famous quote from the 37th president of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson, right? When he said, if you convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, if you give him somebody to look down on, he'll empty his pockets for you, right? And he said this because he understood the mentality of white America extremely well, and had been a school teacher in a very poor part of Texas, and had seen, how, if you could simply, like I said, what he said is give them somebody to believe that they're better than, and they will do whatever for you. And we've seen literally people empty their pockets, right? For somebody who just gave them permission to think that they're at least better, right, than somebody. It's not hard to understand. People who don't have much, who don't have an education, don't have success in this country set up for them to succeed, need someone to believe that it's somebody took this from me. I didn't get into Harvard because this guy got into Harvard. No, you didn't get into Harvard because you can barely read. But hey, whatever helps you sleep at night, right? I didn't get this promotion because they gave it to the diversity hire, right? Right. I remember, hearing all these people complaining and whining and whatever about, I mean, even the smallest of opportunities that wasn't going to them. And when I hear people say, "Oh, immigrants," oh, okay, yeah, you go out in those strawberry fields in Fresno, right, at 6 in the morning and pick, 14 hours a day. Is that the job you're afraid someone took from you? I mean, it just blows my mind, this need to have, a scapegoat, a someone to point to and say, this is why I'm not. Because it seems that every white man in America thinks he should be a millionaire, right? And if he's not, somebody did this to me, right? Who did it? Who did this? Who did this? Why am I not a millionaire? And as long as you can convince them it's this outside enemy, whoever the outside enemy is, right? The Mexicans, the blacks, the whoever it is, right? The Jews, whoever it is, it's somebody. It's somebody's fault. It's got to be somebody's fault. And that is back to your original, oh, good, it comes full circle. Your original question, right? So America has a mental illness, right? America collectively has a mental illness, James. And it dates back, right, to 1619, right, off the coast of Port Comfort, which is now Newport News, Virginia, in my hometown. And from the moment they began importing Africans and exterminating Native Americans, the disease took hold. And America has never, ever, ever even sought therapy. So yes, it's a mental illness. The country is mentally ill collectively. Mm-hmm. When you add to that we have more guns than people, right? There's, what is it? Is it 2.45 firearms per human being in America? Something like that. I know the number's somewhere around there. Would you give a mentally ill person a gun, even if they weren't violent? Right? So would you give a mentally ill nation millions of weapons? So everything that's happened is not only predictable, it's expected. None of this surprises me one teeny iota.
But even after killing kids in schools, even after, they won't do anything about it. They sit on their damn hands and say, we can't do this or we can't. Even after seeing this, they sit up there and they do this shit. You know, I mean,
yep. Well, I knew when all those white kids got murdered at Sandy Hook and nothing happened. I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, no, it's for real now. Like, I got it now. Okay.
You would
I don't need me anything more. It was clear to me
Go ahead, Bill.
To whom they would bend the knee.
Dr. Casey, you agree with a lot of things that Bill was saying. Is America mentally ill as a nation? And if it is, where is the treatment?
I said that a long time ago because we have the white people that have their issues based on how they were raised, and then the black people we have opposing mental illnesses. We have one side that's raised on hate, fear of being conquered by people that's not even seeking to conquer them. We are not seeking to conquer them, but they fear that we will conquer them because they've done so many harsh things to us. So a lot of their hate is based on fear. A lot of their hate and fear is based on the knowledge of them being Europeans in America. And because they know more about history than we do, they have a fear that one day we'll learn it. Those are things that I believe that they fear. So you have one group that's fearful in this way. And then you have another group that's fearful of being slaughtered at the drop of a dime whenever the other people feel like they might get upset about anything. If they call the cops, anything is triggering for white people to have us lynched, killed, harassed, and everything else. So we are they're hypersensitive. We are so tired that we are hyper, I don't even want to say aggressive, because we're not, but we are in a place to where we don't know what to do. If we be nice, you mad. If we if we put our hands up and say don't shoot, you mad. If we kneel, you mad. If we whatever we do, they gonna be mad. There's nothing that we can do that will not make them upset, because they are triggered. I don't know why they're so triggered, but they are extremely triggered. But on our end, we are have to be defensive, and we aren't proactive enough to really get ahead of anything. We aren't proactive enough to really see the changes that we need before all hell breaks loose. It's always all hell breaks loose, and then we pursue whatever it is that we're saying that we want. And then that only lasts for about a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then everything just fizzle on out, and everybody start doing whatever they was doing before. So it's not a persistent effectiveness. And when you talk about Martin's dream, Dr. King, um, literally, he said his dream was a nightmare. So he had realized that that dream might have been more of a warning, or more of something to be prepared for, or something else than what he assumed that it was. And how do you address it, man? It's hard, because you have to try to address every aspect of it, and it's very hard to get people to see themselves, especially when you say mental health. um People are in denial. Here we go back to this Christian deniers thing, because if you give them Jesus, they are going to act like that they are okay. They will live a life of denial with no problem if you give them enough things to distract them from their reality. This is why we got codependent people, people that can't sit alone, can't be alone. They always got to have somebody around. They always need somebody. They can never just be alone. They always got to go somewhere, do something. So addressing it is going to be trying to get people to see themselves, trying to get people to admit that some shit that been going on in their life might have them perplexed and confused and acting as though they'll be hurt for the rest of their lives beyond behind whatever it is that they experience. And a lot of people hold on to hurt instead of looking for the lesson and seeing, okay, now how do I avoid that shit again? They hold on to it and then keep replaying the same hurt. So they think that, oh, I'm holding on to it. They go, no, you're holding on to it, and now you're creating a cycle, because now you're only attracting that same energy over and over and over and over again. So, it's a lot. I can't, it's no one thing to heal everybody. Some people need coaching. Some people need counseling. Some people might need a little bit of medicine for a minute so that they can come out of whatever it is that they in. But everybody needs something different. So you have to cater to the individual. You have to cater to the cultures. You have to cater to the different mindsets. You have to cater to the classes. You have to cater to the races. You have not racists, but the different ethnicities that exist. But you do have to cater to the races too, because they gonna need somebody that's gonna, like, there's a movie that Spike Lee made, the Klansman movie. Um, oh man, that movie was so damn good. But you need people that
Totally Bravo Sierra though, because the guy that they're sort of lionizing was completely a plant. But that's a whole other
Yeah.
discussion.
so but the concept behind the movie, and it's another movie with a older black lady who went and was having to have these board meetings with this older white cop, and they ended up learning each other and becoming friends long term. I can't think
Yeah.
of the name of that movie
Yeah,
either,
I
but
know which one you're talking about. Yeah, I know exactly
you
what you.
have to get people, even if they're uncomfortable, that's willing to face the truth. A lot of people don't want to face reality.
Brother Williams, glad to have you tonight. And of course, I kind of took up things where I left off last week about hate.
Yeah.
And I was kind of using, the example of prison, where, at one time, prison was supposed to rehabilitate you. They had programs, so forth and so on. And then in the 90s, all of a sudden, you know, uh, when they started the difference with the powder and the crack, then you got these absurdly long sentences. You had the RICO Act. I mean, all of these things came into play. So I asked you last week about being able to rehabilitate hate, and you gave me a few examples. But is there also a recidivism in hate?
Well, I mean, yes and no. This is part of the problem we're dealing with in terms of just highlighting the um the issues we've been talking about. And what that has to do is what's referred to within a younger age bracket is what they call impulse control. And impulse control kind of goes into the fact that teenagers or younger adults may act upon their emotions without fully thinking something out, and from that standpoint they try to couple that with having access to assault weapons or firearms too easily will cause them to go out and commit crimes, as well as they say that the 60% of those of the gun violence that took place or killings that took place in 2020 to 21 were at suicides. So from that standpoint, the idea here is we're talking about a younger population that ends up committing murders and shootings before they had an opportunity to think it through. So from that standpoint, someone going and getting incarcerated and not getting a death penalty, yeah, it's a possibility that they can be reformed, even the hate point of view. But to me, that is not a position to stand upon in terms of addressing hate. The fact that, oh well, they can be rehabilitated, because we know the bottom line is this society and this culture breeds hate and endorses it to a certain degree, especially through entitlement. So that's not a winnable argument, nor should that be an argument at all. I feel that anybody should try to use to justify or categorize that behavior in the same category with with traditional mental illness as it applies to childhood trauma. No, it's to me is different.
Have you done that field, Mr. Scott? What's your thoughts?
Well, this hate and subversive things in this country right now, there are all kinds of groups. There are groups that I haven't even heard of. I mean, happened to see something on the news today of some people went up to Portland or Idaho or
Coeur
somewhere, and they
d'Alene,
were going
Coeur
to jump
d'Alene,
on
Idaho.
these LBGT, and they opened up the truck and it was just full of arms, just full of full of bombs and everything you can think of. So this hate stuff, they're really not telling us exactly, I don't believe nearly how bad this thing is. This is a group I never heard of. So they're targeting people. And so I I think hate has its own momentum. I think that some people are brought up in it, and I think that they just jump on it without having an ability or an interest in looking at any alternative to that type of thinking. And generationally, they do that. And I mean, this is the history of where we live, where they always think that they can tell us, they're always fearful of us. As Dr. Casey said earlier, they're fearful. They think one day we're going to they know in the back of their mind what they've done to us. They know
Mhm.
that. And they figure, boy, if somebody had done that to me, what would I do? And I mean, I think that this is what fuels the fear. This is what is through our police forces. This is where they have guns, they have weapons, they have armaments, and it's a war. I mean, it really is. It really is a war, and it's coming more and more to the open. When they jumped into the Capitol and say that doesn't, it's becoming more and more to the open, and it's like, what are we really going to do about these things?
So, Mr. Scott, touching on Martin Luther King, is his dream still just a dream, or have we progressed?
Boy, he saw exactly what was going on. He took the steps that he could take. He got Lyndon Johnson to sign that act, and like I say, when these bad things happen, they jump in fast motion and they give you. It's like James earlier today. You were talking and I saw your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear anything. This is what they do with us. I mean, the Native Americans figured that out from the day one. You speak with forked tongue. They figured that out right from the beginning. So his dream is dissipated because he's gone, and all those things that happen, they just tend to always default back to their roots. I mean, this is what I've seen. Will it get better? I certainly hope so.
Well, are we destined? Once again, I think we talked about this many months ago. Hope, yeah, it's
Well, here's what I will say. In a strange sort of way, it's sort of good news what had happened with the Patriot Front and their 31 members who got busted in Coeur d'Alene. For those who don't know the history of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, at one point the Church of Christ Identity had a major compound there, the Sword Arm of Christ, and the Order. I don't know if you guys remember the Order, but the Order was one of the first really active as in getting in shootouts, robbing banks, like all kinds of stuff um, of the sort of new white nationalist movement that emerged from the one that sort of started to go downhill at the end of the 60s and sort of fractured apart about halfway through the 70s. So at one point it was all Klan all the time, and then the Klan started to splinter into smaller and smaller subgroups. And eventually you had these guys who were like too cool for the Klan, for lack of a better way of putting it, and felt like the Klan was sort of backwards and whatever it is, and they didn't want to wear hoods and they didn't want to burn crosses, but they wanted to, take down, the Jewish American Defense League and the Southern Christian, they want, the usual targets, right? The usual suspects, but they wanted to do it their way, and so they idolized a different group. And so the Turner Diaries was their Bible. And, Timothy McVeigh sort of aligns with that group that I'm talking about. And several of them were former military, which is one reason they were just like James can tell you why they're so good at robbing banks and stuff like that. So Coeur d'Alene has a rich history in modern day neo-Nazism. So to me, it represented something of a turning point that in Coeur d'Alene, of all places, they busted these guys. I can tell you, if this had been 30 years ago, those guys wouldn't have been busted. I'll tell you that much. They would
might
have
have been given an escort. They might have been given a police escort.
They might have been the police.
Brother Williams, so as I said, is there a different way to attack this? I mean, it seems like I mean, we can't keep hoping, we can't keep sitting on our hands, but yet we can't match the armament right now either. So we don't have that alternative. So as I was saying, people talk about gas prices and the increase in food prices like that doesn't affect our community, it only affects them. I mean, what's up with that?
Well,
I mean, it costs you $5.50 or whatever to put gas in your car just like it does everybody else, right?
yeah. Well, I would challenge you when we're talking about civilian racism and not being able to match those the alternatives. So we are
Well,
talking about
let
some
the
kids
yeah.
who have the same access to the same gun stores. Okay, so I would say we can. I think the biggest problem with black folks applies to that as to us. Let me just say the law-abiding black people. When we think about buying a gun, oftentimes the only aspect that we think about is for burglarization or home defense,
Yep.
where we don't think about protecting us just in general. Kind of like what I always say, and Scott said earlier today, recognizing that we are at war. And being that in when I was in Texas, it was several plenty of times without going obviously into detail on the air, so where I would do surveillance on some neo-Nazi training camps, and the training that I saw, we documented, and we also would borrow some of the same stuff when we trained as people, just from the standpoint of being aware of the fact that they are training to be able to kill us. And
Hmm.
one thing I do want to bring to the listening audience attention, back to what Bill talked about with the Turner Diaries, and a lot of people may not be aware of, outside of firearms, it has also been talked about, and there's documents and books that I've read that they go into to where they talk about doing mass killings through poisoning of water
Yep.
supplies and
Yep.
all and of food supplies and all types of crazy things like that. So I don't want people to get caught up on thinking that mass killings in the United States is only going to be cornered when as it applies to firearms,
Right.
especially when it get to the point to where like what they're doing with the laws and stuff, or changing to where it may be inadequate for them to take it up to continue that way. They're just going to turn it up a notch, and we're going to find other methods that's gonna start leaching out. So as a people, we just have to basically be prepared to protect and defend ourselves against all forms of racist brutality and attack, like we say in our platform. That just needs to be our mentality. I'm not saying we need to have the mentality of doing tit for tat. I'm just saying we need to have the mentality of being able to defend ourselves and not find it should I not be tricked into feeling I guess what is it
Secure.
what I'm thinking of is what they try to make you feel guilty for having the firearm. They try to make you
Oh,
feel guilty for wanting to protect yourself, or feel guilty for preparing and just thinking on that level. And when
Mm.
I say on that level, I'm just basically, again, I say all the time, we have to stop, get out of survival mode and get into living mode. And to get into living mode, we have to, we have to elevate our game. One of the things that still sits in the back of my mind that pissed me off years and years ago is when the New Black Panther Party, when I was with them, and we went and marched in Jasper, Texas, when the Klan was basically going to march throughout the black community to celebrate killing James Byrd Jr. Jesse Jackson went on went on public media and the news and basically gave the answer for black folks is to walk in pairs and never and make sure you not do not go out at night. When we give our people advice that justifies and encapsulates fear, and we ride that wave out, all we doing is setting ourselves up to continue to be victims. See, if you act like a victim and you operate like a victim, then you just become a target, and rightfully so. Now, mind you, just going back to the situation in Buffalo, that dude went up into a place where he knew he would not be confronted with other cats with guns. He wouldn't go. He didn't take his. He didn't go into the hood where we are all armed. He went up into a store. So a lot of the stuff that are done when it comes to this is intended to get mass casualties that are unprepared and not thinking, or not in a position to be able to defend themselves. So me, that in itself is a coward, is a coward act, and you can't put that under the category of somebody that is dealing with a mental illness and operating, on that quote unquote impulse control. That dude wrote out in his documents
Yep.
that he pointed out in the first few pages that I did what I did, and I was not I was not acting on impulse, and that he was not under any mental illness. He basically referred to himself as being the average white citizen, and hoping that what he did sparked the courage and fused white America to rise up and take their country back. He opened up his document basically justifying his actions and justifying the nature and drawing on his his consciousness of what he had to do. So, you know, again, we're talking about an 18-year-old child that was indoctrinated. I believe he was indoctrinated, but at the same time, mind you, the whole position that we're talking about is the effects, like I said last week, of social media, the effects of what happened with isolation through COVID-19,
Mm.
the effects of just people being exposed overly things and not being able to being provided adequate parenting and all kinds of things as it applies to not being able to keep up emotionally with the pace of the access to technology and resources that go inside with people's maturity level, and that is going to get worse.
Bill, you want to comment? Dr. Casey, anybody
Sure.
want to comment?
I mean, it's to sort of plug into that. He had made a few different lists of places he thought about going after, right? And he'd made his list and he checked it twice, right? He had gone through, surveillance and, sort of dry runs and things like that. He had a pretty good idea of, where the security person was and how active they were likely to be and how quickly he thought he could neutralize. I mean, whatever he was, yeah, impulse was no part of it. Like, you could say whatever you want, but impulse wasn't an issue. This was months invested in this. And he's not alone. I mean, not this doesn't describe all of them, but many of them had practiced, planned, like, once again, a manifesto, all that good stuff. The guy out in oh God, I can't remember what town in California it was a couple of years ago, had a super long manifesto too. And he was the one that was like on about like how, women should be more available to him sexually and all kind of crazy stuff. But he went on forever in his manifesto about a bunch of different stuff. There was some racial stuff. It was all over the place. Like, pick a lane, dude. But he went off in like all these different directions in his manifesto. But if you read these manifestos, and I've read more of them than probably I should, the one through line is, it's like I said before, it's somebody else's fault, right? That's what comes through in all of them. None of these people, and they're often very young, as pointed out, none of them are able to take accountability for the current state of their lives. None of them are able to say, oh, this is happening because I made a bad decision, or I'm not a good person, or women hate me because I'm a no goodness or schmuck or whatever. None of them say that, right? Or I can't get this job, or I can't get this whatever because of me. It's never me. It's never something that's wrong with me. It's never something that I'm not doing. It's always other people. So when you add to that, the lack of the prefrontal cortex having been fully matured, people being inundated with, I mean, if you like conspiracy theories, you could spend literally the rest of your life drenched to them, right? I mean, every conspiracy theory, and I don't mind a good conspiracy theory every now and again, hey, but I don't live there. Like, that's not what I don't spend all day with them. I'll check one out every now and again, and every once in a while, oh, turns out that was true, right? But that's not my whole thing. Like, that's not my identity. I'm not the conspiracy theory guy, right? If you're a person that is the rabbit hole you go down every day, all day, every day, all day, every day, then after a while, it's not that hard to convince yourself or be convinced by someone else, and maybe a combination of the two, that you need to be this race soldier or whatever it is they call themselves and do this thing for the race. I mean, it's not that different from what the Taliban does with, I mean, you don't see 50-year-olds, right? The Taliban's not getting 50-year-olds to blow themselves up, right? That's not how it's working. These are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, sometimes 19, early 20s at the oldest, right? That are turning themselves into martyrs. They're not 40. They're not 50. Heck, they're not even 30. The oldest one I can remember seeing, I think, was probably 27, but it's usually less than that. So these are people who, once again, the same thing we talked about, isolation, lack of connection within their community, and definitely lack of connection to other communities. People who need someone else to believe it's their fault that their lives haven't worked out. And last but not least, people who've been inundated in something that takes them away from sort of the normal day-to-day operations of things you have to do to just maintain yourself, whether it be that your parents take care of all your whatevers. But if you have to go to the Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it is, you have to take a break from all this stuff that normally that these people sort of douse themselves in to be able to do these acts. So if you've got, I mean, Dylan Ruth didn't have a job. I mean, most of these guys don't. If the ones that do have jobs, they're jobs that don't require a lot of interaction, or keep them from having to deal with all kinds of people all the time, right? So if you're isolated enough, long enough, and you drench yourself in this stuff, and it's all you do, like you just lay down in a bath of crazy all day long. Once again, like I said before, these things are in fact to be expected. None of it's unpredictable. And guess what? I hate to say this, but 2 days from now, we'll be talking about this again.
Let me say one quick thing to add to what Bill's talking about in regards to the whole conspiracy thing, and just again to talk on social media, especially YouTube. When you click on a certain video on YouTube, now it's going to start seeing feeds of like videos that are similar to what you watch.
Yep.
And so if a person watched something that's kind of far out on the deep end, and then they found it interesting, and they click on another one, next thing you know, the analytics is going to lean toward that type of thing. And so from that standpoint, it's easy for somebody to go far off into into space from that standpoint and never come back down, because the more they start clicking, it just builds a pattern. And that's what I mean when I talk about the inability for people's maturity level to keep up with what's going on. They don't recognize that they're being fed this type of stuff, and based on their pattern, that pattern sets in, and now you're seeing more of this stuff. And so, not knowing that there's a whole different world out there that they're not being exposed to based on the analytics, because it just now sends you the kind of stuff that it thinks that you're going to watch. And so from that standpoint, when you do that to a younger mind, now it causes them to again be exposed to things that they don't know is non-real, a fantasy world, so to speak. And it causes them to go off the deep end. And then when you couple that with isolation of the younger generation, now really not, you know, engaging in each other physically other than school, and then with virtual school being one of the biggest open options that people are taking, their whole entire world is based upon what they witness and see on YouTube, and the perspectives and realities that are painted for them, that is based upon what people want you to think in terms of their environment.
Yeah, but don't they monitor this stuff? Don't they have to monitor this stuff? I mean, look at they.
Who is
I
when you
would when I say they, I'm talking about government or whatever. All these
I
people
mean,
on social
government
media.
yeah,
but they're selective though. They will monitor more people who watching Bobby Hemmett and political uh stuff than anything. And I wanted to say that when you're talking about the algorithms, it is not just for supremacist stuff. If you go and watch Bobby Hemmett, if you
yeah,
go and watch any
that's what
person,
anything.
it's going to and I remember it was a guy that I was in the military with, and he started listening and watching and feeding into a lot of the sovereignty type of stuff. And I mean, and he was going off the deep end. He's like, I'm not doing taxes, I'm not doing this. And I'm like, okay, all of that sounds good and it probably might work, but don't go off the deep end so far to where now you're sounding, I don't want to say crazy, but when if you go too far into any conspiracy, I mean, and it's if you talk about space, flat earth, if you talk about what whatever
Kennedy
one
assassination.
tickles your fancy, psychics, paranormal activity, whatever it is, you can get lost in la la land and you be so deep to where reality no longer seems real. So it's not like just one area, it's any area. And I've seen people like they really start tripping out because they getting this new information, but they're not getting it with balance. They're not getting it with substance, even. And a lot of these people, whether it's white people or black people with very strong views, it's more hate driven sometimes, where what they're saying is good. They might have some good points, but it's so strongly within hate and defense sometimes that it will make you walk out the door how you do after you see a racist movie where black people getting killed for no reason. You walk out that door, you be pissed, you be ready to smack the shit out of somebody. And sometimes you can watch stuff on YouTube that will have you in a trance that deep.
And one real quick for the listening audience, I want them to know that, and a lot of people not familiar with it. There's a branch of psychology called cyber psychology that goes deep into the whole aspect of what we're talking about in terms of how social media is basically used and can be weaponized against people from the standpoint of not recognizing the dangers of it. They draw a connection between ADHD, low self-esteem, depression, social isolation,
Yep.
and another one, another concept that I thought was funny, just based on the name of the title, is called fear of missing out. This is a
Mhm.
basically a byproduct of social media where people think that they're going to miss something if they don't stay engaged in social media, and that in itself has become a crazy aspect of people's lives. And it creates, they talked about addictive behavior, sleep deprivation, negative relationships, and how that's used. It's a real deep study from a psychological standpoint in terms of all of the things that go into social media that most people are not aware of.
Then if you put business in there, you add any type of, need based performance when it comes to social media, it makes it worse because now you're not just engaging in it for entertainment. Now your whole company is ran through it. Now your whole livelihood goes through it. So you can't really disengage too much or you will be missing something technically. I mean, when I first started, I was like that. And then in a time where Instagram or Facebook, they didn't have a way for you to download all of your content. You got people that's starting to build their business on these platforms. And then you get so deep in and you don't know how to get out. I felt trapped to Instagram for a very long time because everything that I've ever written was on Instagram. All of my rhymes, all of my little funny, witty stuff, everything was stuck. It was like prison guard. You couldn't copy a page, you couldn't edit it, you couldn't do nothing. It was just there. And it'll make you feel like you're trapped. So it is real. Social media is a real strong thing. And the funny part is that once you get a break from it, you be like, okay. And then, you gotta kind of it's almost like when I smoke, I have to take tolerance breaks. I hadn't been doing it so often, but I do it so that I am not so where now I need you go from just hitting it once to now you got to hit 4, 5 times to now you need 3, 4 blunts. Like, but if you take a time to get balance and do, what I'm saying, space it out, it gives you the ability to have a lower tolerance. Is why people go from one drug to the other because they are so consumed in it. They're doing it so much most times to escape whatever it is that they're facing to where now it's so they feel like they can't live without it. And
Right.
sometimes you realize you stop for a minute, you realize, well, damn, life is not that bad without it. You know what I'm
But
saying?
but,
But a
but
lot of
it's
people
legal in most places now. It's legal.
subjectively.
but that I understand what you're saying, Dr. Casey, and even though I've been smoking, like I said, for many years, I take a break every now and then. Sometimes every 6 months, sometimes every 18 months. But you know, you do develop a tolerance, and you have to take that break. Uh, but the point is, or point being, you can't once you get finished with that blunt or whatever, hate is still there.
Hmm.
And you know, I don't care. You can smoke a pound, you're not going to run away from it, and it's still going to be present. So maybe it's maybe that's why people deal in opioids, fentanyl, and things like that, because it's something stronger. But how do you, like I said, how do you take a person that has been full of hate, then you put them back? Usually, here's what happens: you go to jail, you're homies, you're all fine, we're all from the same town, da da da. Everybody gets along. But as soon as you get back out in the street and you're back in that system that reinforces those beliefs, all of a sudden you go back to being the N word again because I'm comfortable now in
The
my
situation.
surroundings.
It's
Right.
almost like when I was married, as long as we didn't live in Atlanta, we was good because in Atlanta we comfortable. We can bump heads and we go in our own ways and we good. But when we lived in Phoenix, we didn't have nobody to run to. We didn't have nowhere to go outside of each other. So we were able to talk and communicate and, make it work, at least for the time being. So I always knew outside of Atlanta, we probably could work. But if we ever moved back to Atlanta, it would not work because of the comfort. So knowing that mentally is something that won't register for most people. But if you can realize it, it's very important.
What do you think about that, Mr. Scott? Familiarity breeds contempt.
It depends. Yeah, your environment has a lot to do with it. You know, who's around you. Like I've always been in a situation where I've had nothing but family around. Matter of fact, when I got married, my wife, she was so tight with my mother and then her mother, and she had three sisters. And I mean, it's like, well, I can't win here because it's all these people. And so, yeah, your environment, to me makes a big deal. I mean, I never, my wife and my mom were so close. My mom died maybe less than a year after we got married. It was just terrible. But when I would call her, I would say to her, I said, look, me and Jackie, we got to get a new bed. Uh, she kicks too much. She throws her arms around. And so my mom goes, well, what you guys doing over there? You tearing the bed down already? Why are you all tearing the bed? I said, no, 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 mom. Jackie kicks. She throws her hand. Well, you don't have to be doing all that now. Just let it, well, so your environment, and I tell
Mr.
you, I
Scott,
miss all of that. To this day, it
Mr.
kind of
Scott,
kept me
are you
grounded.
sure it was just from kicking? Because I never seen that much kicking in before in my life.
uh,
See, there you go. You don't get Mr. Scott riled up now.
I just, I mean, the story, kind of like when he said earlier that he had got all dressed up. It was kind of one of those energies where the story just didn't have the balance that it needed to make sense.
I might be losing connection here. I don't know if I see your mouth
And he
working,
told
but
that
I
needed
didn't
to
hear
make
anything.
sense.
So I might be losing the connection.
Yeah, but Mr. Scott, it kind of reminds me of like the other night when I think you were at the Yankees game and you hit me up and you said, well, the Twins had just hit three straight home runs, and that's kind of how like the civil rights movement went. We hit a couple home runs in the '60s and '70s. But all of a sudden, it's the 2000s, and the Yankees that rallied. Judge that hit two home runs out there to right field. No, Gallo, I think it was, that hit the two home runs. And you lose. I mean, it seems like we prematurely celebrate small victories
Well, and
instead of waiting for the end of the battle.
the thing is, like we were saying, the victories are just not sustained. The things that they say they're going to do, like in the 60s and affirmative action and all of these things, it's just not sustained. It just all starts over again. This the George Floyd and all these police shootings. This is in the news now. Oh, we've got to get in fast motion. We've got to talk about this. We've got to do this. But then they just let the days go by and it just dissipates and it defaults back to the default program until we're able to do something about it. Let me grab this.
Uh, Bill, once again, when you look at the you know the backlash, of course, like all of this is happening now because of the former defund the police movement, which there never really was. I don't think a defund the police movement. As I've always said, reform the police. And now it seems as though the first thing that these gun owners say is, well, it's a mental health problem, so now the solution is to arm everybody, give everybody a gun.
I mean, if America's solution in terms of violence could be solved by more guns, it would have been solved already. We are, of all the major industrialized nations, we are the most armed. Like the only places where there's more arms per capita are literally countries that are at war. I mean, I don't mean internally. I mean, I guess externally. I mean, I guess we're at war too, but it's internal. The fact is that if we could, hey, let's put this fire out with what? We've got all this gasoline. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about pouring an accelerant on a blaze that has been smoldering for not even smoldering, it's burning, frankly, for centuries, and then has burned out of control for decades. And the solution is to pour gasoline on it. That's what I'm hearing, right? The real fact is that this country, as we mentioned before, has a deep-seated problem, and has had it for hundreds and hundreds of years, and won't admit to it. First of all, that's the first issue. Like, you can't fix something you won't admit that's a problem. That's the first thing. So, one, you've got these centuries of denial and avoidance regarding America's deep-seated original sin. Two, even the most minute, the most benign, the most, kind of erasing around the margins of the problem, things that have to do with any, even the slightest alteration of what's going on, universal background checks, universal cooling off period, all the things that sort of seem, frankly, common sense, you get pushback on even the most minor things, So when people talk about, like more draconian measures, they're frankly unrealistic. If you can't get universality in terms of things like licensure, background checks, permits, a mandatory cooling off period, if those things can't get passed, if those things can't be made national, right? They're in places, right? Like people say, well, Chicago is a case study proving that making it more difficult to get a gun doesn't work. Well, the fact that you can drive 40 minutes in any direction and be in a place where it's super easy to get a gun means that it doesn't matter what Chicago does. If I go 40 miles south or 30 miles, not even 40 miles, if I go 22 miles south, if I go 8.5 miles west, if I go due north, end up in the lake, I guess. But if I go north and west for 15, 16 miles, like in any direction, I go to a place where it's so much easier to get a gun. And then when you factor in how many internal transfers take place between, individual owners that don't go through gun shops, that aren't properly documented, we don't even really know how many guns there are in America. Like when they tell you there's X number of guns, that's something they know about, right? There's millions, probably at least hundreds of thousands, and probably millions. But I'll be conservative. Let's just say there's another 180,000. I'm sure it's bigger than that, of ghost guns, right? Guns that fell off of something at the plant, or somebody made them on a 3D printer, or there's all these different. So nobody really knows, but the number is huge, right? So if you think the answer is more guns, like really, I mean, like that's hilarious to me, because the nation is already an armed camp, right? We're already extreme. There's no other nation, major industrialized nation that's armed like we are. So that's clearly not the answer, James.
Mr. Scott, is always good having you with us. Why don't you give us your final thoughts for the evening?
Well, I'm really against all this gun violence, and I'm against all this. I don't see why we as a nation can't do something about it. I mean, I think we just have a total inertia with our whole political system. It's Joe Biden looks like he could topple over at any minute, and so they're really not interested in Kamala Harris becoming president. I haven't seen any groundswell or anything for that. And then you have the ominous presence of an idiot 45 that acts like he still runs this country for some reason. And you have all these people still talking about elections. Oh, something's over with. We have these people that are just living in a fantasy world and not doing anything about it. So I've gotten behind a few candidates here in Minneapolis to hope we can make some changes here, but any change at this point just looks like it's incremental. I mean, it's like Denny Green said, well, they are who we thought they were. And that's kind of the world we live in now.
Bill, your final thoughts for the evening.
Well, I wish I had good news to report, but I didn't come here to lie to you. So for those that like to track, and I'm sure Mr. Williams is backing up with this, who like to track the numbers and the memberships of white nationalist hate groups, or whatever, how we want to describe them, within U.S. borders, not only the numbers in terms of numbers of distinct groups, but their membership has been a steady upward trend, well, for a while, but I'll just go from, say, the last 8 or so years. According to the numbers I have, about a 54% upswing in the last just less than a decade. And each of those new groups has apparently done a pretty good job of recruiting. So we're seeing, and it's a symptom, right? I mean, that's still sort of the canary in the coal mine. The issue isn't, because these are still a small number. I mean, it's a small number of the total population. But what their existence is, they're the outliers. What their existence is an indicator of the temperature closer to the core, right? So they're further out. They're further out. They're the fringe, right? They're the fringe. Even though there's more of them and the number of groups has grown, it's still a small number. But their growth is indicative of a shift in the core as well. So we have reached a point where people are no longer as, I don't want to say embarrassed, but they're no longer as willing to hide certain things. And I remember somebody made mention of the whole algorithm. So I have a teenage daughter, and she is a YouTube. If ever there's a field called YouTubeology, my daughter has a job. She spends time on YouTube like it is her actual job that someone's paying her to do. So please, someone pay her to do it. But in lieu of that, at one point she'd gone down a very serious rabbit hole of like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, sweet Jesus God. And I told her, I'm never going to tell you that you can't watch something as long as it's, not actually, extreme sex, extreme violence, whatever. But anything else, even if it's, thought processes and human beings that I don't personally support, but the rules have to discuss it afterwards. So I remember at one point my daughter was asking me about the men's rights movement, sweet God in heaven. And I said, okay, Avery, which men? She said men. I was like, had you look at the men that are part of the men's rights movement? Like, what do they look like? And you realize after a while, it's like, pretty much all white guys. Yes, they're pretty much all white guys. So do you think, truly, Avery, just think for a moment, that there's a group of white men in America, and Canada, I guess we can throw them in as well, that have such a strong grievance that they need a rights movement to address it? And she said, well, she mentioned some stuff about like what happens in divorces and other stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I'm not disputing any of what you're saying, the specifics of what you're saying. I'm saying that, of the violent crime in America, who commits most of it? Almost all of it, right? Men. Okay. So I went down all the list, right, of all the things that men should be worried about, that men do, as opposed to being so worried about like tiny incremental growth of what women have been able to accomplish in the last 50 or so years. Still, 94% of the Fortune 500 companies are run by men. Like we went down the whole list. And I said, look, if you want to worry about the men's rights movement, I'm a man, I appreciate your concern, but not these men. Like, if you, please don't choose these men. Like, don't save your tears for someone not Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson. Like, that's not the guys you should be worried about. I mean, not worried about helping at least. Somebody mentioned child rearing, and it's what an adventure it is. Because I realized that if I banned them, I said, you can't watch Ben Shapiro anymore, no more Jordan Peterson. I knew what that would do, right? Because now she's going to watch it harder and hide it from me, right? And so you have to engage and not say, not forbid, you can't watch so-and-so anymore. You can't, one time I sort of kiddingly called her Candace Owens, and that like hurt her a little bit. And I told her, like, I'm kidding, but yeah, she hated that. Oh, that, woo. Yeah. But like, so apparently she draws the line at Candace Owens. I guess that's where we've gone too far in my
Very good.
And she's come back. This is like 2 years ago. She's come back a little bit since then, to be perfectly honest. Like she's come out of this a little bit. But instead of saying, like, you can't do this, you can't watch that, because the more things you ban, the more things you forbid, like that drives them underground, right? And if anyone here who's raised teenagers, and first of all, God bless you, and I owe you a drink. But anyone who's raised teenagers, and we should all drink together about that. But anyone who's raised teenagers, after a while you figure out, like, I've got to be more savvy about this. I've got to be a little more, like I can't engage in like frontal attack, right? Because that does all that does is drives it underground. And now I won't even know what they're watching, right? I mean, that's what you don't want. Like, that's when it gets bad, when they don't engage with you, they stop asking you questions, they stop talking to you. So active parenting, and once again, I thank Mr. Ward Williams for bringing up active parenting. Active parenting is a full contact sport, right? It takes everything out of you. You're exhausted when you're done. I mean, my God. I've been to Ranger School. I've wrestled in college. I've done lots of things that were very demanding, but nothing is like parenting, man. Wow. Woo, parenting. Woo, it takes everything you've got, but it's so worth it. Like, no matter what it costs you, no matter how tired you are, you got to keep doing it. You've got to answer the bell. No matter what you feel like, no matter what crazy thing they say or do, or what they want to do with their hair or piercings or all that other stuff, just answer the bell. And instead of shutting them down, we're not going to talk about that, or no, you can't do it. As hard as it is, you have to say, okay, help me to understand why that interests you, right? Oh, I hated engaging with her about Jordan Peterson and Bill Shapiro and also the crazy stuff, but I had to do it. Because if I shut her down or said, you can't do that, or they're just stupid or whatever, if instead I said, okay, well, let's look at what they're saying, and is it true or is it not true, right? And, the whole Aristotelian and whatever, walking through it all and saying, hey, look at this, and does this make sense? And do you think this is really true? And have you seen this in your own life? That went on way longer than a minute, so sorry. But active parenting, if you're out there doing it, please keep doing it. If you're not doing it, please do. And I promise you, it'll be worth it.
Brother Williams.
All right. I got to give a disclaimer before I get started. Dr. K, don't kill me for one of the things I'm about to say.
Okay.
But I do want to point out one thing that Bill referenced in terms of weapon sales. Now, according to Protecting Our Kids Act, some of the documents that was embedded in it in terms of the discussion, 2020 was a record-breaking year in weapon and gun sales. They said it was 22.8 million firearms sold in the United States. And I don't know if it's United States, honestly, but I just know it says 22 million. And then in 2021, 18 million were sold. So that just kind of gives you a number of what we're talking about when we talk about firearms and weapons. So that's a
Yep.
lot. Um, but one thing I want to bring up in regards to looking at a trend, and one of the things that has helped play into the young male, whether we talk about or the white male or black male, the bottom line is young men that has put us in danger in terms of one of the things happening is this concept called toxic masculinity, because that false narrative of toxic masculinity drives people, it drives young men to actually be more emotional than they normally would be in terms of being logical. Now when a man is basically gui- uh, guilt tripped into feeling like he's too masculine, which again doesn't make sense, a man becomes too masculine, then basically what does that mean? If I'm too masculine, what is that? What does that drive me toward? That drives me toward emotionalism. And now when you get driven toward emotionalism, and then you go into what one of the things that Dr. Casey spoke on earlier, that term that deals with online has to do with what they call digital isolation. Based upon digital isolation, based upon all of the things that causes us to psychologically not be prepared to address the bombardment of what happens with online access to any and everything, we create a society of youth that are basically not prepared for real life scenarios in addressing life as it happens in real life means, because they're used to being fed something to where you receive an answer instantaneously, and that type of mentality, when you're out there addressing life on its real terms, there is no quick fix answer, there is no instant answer to operating on this and addressing the real problems that we'll face. So what happens is you have immaturity that sets in, and a person's inability to be able to cope with dealing with stress. And because of that, these kind of conditions also add to the whole gambit of everything that's going on in terms of just the rise in violence. The rise in violence again goes right back to the idea of what I spoke on earlier in regards to certain levels of immaturity, or what they call impulse control. We are dealing with a younger generation that is more out to have a higher level of emotional outbursts, emotional instability based upon the way they're being raised, going back to what Bill was talking about. So I would say, and just kind of end on the same note he's saying, we have to recognize things for what they are and take accountability for the direction in which society is heading. Because what's going on is the youth are finding themselves basically mislabeled, misrepresented, and driven into these weird areas and weird perspectives that, again, coupled with uh, the misuse of algorithms, what I should say, just creates a society that's not well equipped to be able to operate on the correct level as an adult. So we have to be mindful of the technology that we use. We have to be mindful of the direction that the younger generation is headed toward as it grows up and become starts taking the seats as the next leaders in life, and we start taking a back seat. So do not allow your life to be ruled by fear. Do not be afraid to turn off technology, turn off the stuff, and go back to old school uh, ways of thinking and ways of operating for the sake of that calibration, and what y'all talked earlier about being able to detox yourself from these type of things. We have to make that a requirement, because if we don't, what we're doing is we're dooming ourselves, and we're going to face more and more of the type of illnesses that are plagued with, again, not being able to keep up with the technological advances. But do not allow yourself to live in fear. That's one of the biggest things I have to say, because fear continues to be the biggest driving force of trauma that causes the generations to gap in terms of their operating and working together, which we have to go back to. We have to figure out ways to reconnect the elder, middle, and the young generation. They have to be able to learn from the elder generation within their peer group in in their household, and stop, you know, isolating themselves from the house. Stop isolating themselves from the parent. So I want to just end with that.
Dr. Casey, take us home. We missed you last week, so we're gonna work you this week. You muted. We can't hear you.
What I
Chris,
would say to extend that is it's not just the younger generation. I think it is the my generation that is lost and confused. I think the younger generation, I would say, around my children's age, they probably are more conscious and more aware than we realize, because they not only see the history, they see the present, and they also are able to tap into the information that people in my generation are just now getting the hold to. And some are still afraid to research and read and understand and see beyond the veil of Christianity and all of these other things. So I think that we have to um, still get out of this denial. I won't just say Christian denial. We need to get out of self denial, because a lot of times we know that something is wrong with us. We know that there are things that we need to address and fix within ourselves, but we don't want to do it because we're comfortable and content in being who we've always been. And it's nothing wrong with being content in the sense of I am okay with where I am while I'm building, but don't allow yourself to be content and get stagnant where you're not doing anything to progress what it is that you have going on. Don't be so okay with what things have been that you're okay with it continuing to be that way. And a lot of times we hear people say, um, whether we're talking about old people, they've always been that way. That's just who they are. And we begin to accept people mistreatment and vileness just because that's how they've always been. It's just who they are. But that also goes into every other aspect of life. When we think about changing the laws, changing how our culture works, changing how we respond to things, it's how we've always done it is not going to be suitable forever, because how we've always done it is the reason why we've always been in the same place as a people, as a culture, as a country, because nobody is willing to band together. You got people here and there in the far in betweens. It's like, hey, it's a problem. Let's address it. They get killed. Hey, it's a problem. Let's address it. Something else happened to them. Hey, it's a problem. Whether you're talking about people that work for the CDC that come up missing when they red flag something, or you're talking about political figures that the minute that they begin to talk about something that makes the government or supremacist or extreme groups uncomfortable, then it's always something. So we have to be more willing to come together. Um, I want to say they can't kill us all, but if, if they trick is good enough, then I think that when you have mass shootings, sometimes I always said that if they wanted to trick us into to to death, it would be easy to have a party or a club scene. And
Jim
after I said
Jones.
that, I mean,
Jim Jones. Drink the Kool Aid.
all of those measures are already in place, no
Yep.
matter where it is. So sometimes some of these mass killings are really a crime of convenience, because all you got to do is pick a place, and it's unfortunate that that is the case. And for me, that's why I don't like to go to gatherings sometimes, because it's just not the best place to be. Um, However, instead of avoiding things, we have to address things. And the only way to address things is to acknowledge them. And a lot of times, back to the denial, we have a hard time acknowledging what it is so that we can correct it as a country. So, again, I think that things like Trump being in office helps us to expose what we need to actually grow because for Since I was a kid, they just acting like racism ended when the civil rights began, and the shit is not true. I mean, as a person from Ohio, I almost was convinced when they used to say, "Well, with Mike Vick and with some of the things that was going on, it's because of racism." And I'm like, "Well, no, there is a lot of racism that's underlying that if you are not in certain areas, you wouldn't even realize it. You'd just be thinking, no, that's just what. No, sometimes, and we can see when a black person does something, it's handled one way. When other people do stuff, it's handled a whole different way. Black people can't go nowhere with their guns out and think they about to pull some stunt like the stunts that these people is pulling because as soon as a black person do it, especially in broad daylight, the way this stuff be happening, they're going down. The Capitol would have never happened if I got a whole episode about that. What happened at the Capitol? The minute that a black person would have came up there with any like rah rah with a dragon, they would have been shot. I don't know how those people did what they did other than the color of their skin, and that's crazy to me. But these are the things that are actually allowing us to see what the color of your skin really means. And what better way to end than that? You gotta realize who you are though, because the color of your skin, although they used it as a weapon against us, is really the greatest weapon we could ever have. We absorb the sun. We are literally like we have a mechanism in our human body that nobody else has, and that's what they fear.
But doctor, I don't see color.
But color sees you.
There you go. With that note, have a great night, everyone. I'll talk to everyone next Monday, and have a great night. Hope we covered some good topics, and hope we
Oh,
got
shout out Miss Sims. Where Miss Sims been at? We miss you, Miss Sims. If you listening
Yes,
and watching.
yes, we
uh,
do.
all right. Have a great night, everyone. I'll see
Night.
you next week.